Hello everyone, welcome back to DevNoobs. My name is Jacob and today we are diving into a practical and hands-on project that's not only fun to build but can also significantly enhance your typing skills. We are going to create a custom typing trainer using HTML, CSS and JavaScript. Why this project, you might ask? What's the motivation behind creating a typing trainer? The answer is simple. Enhancing your typing speed and accuracy isn't just a valuable skill in our digital era, but it can also significantly enhance your overall productivity. Whether you are a student, a working professional, or someone eager to elevate their keyboard skills, this project is a tailor-made for you. If you're ready to level up your typing game, hit that subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, and let's jump into building our very own typing trainer from scratch. Let's get started. First thing we will do is open your favorite editor. Mine is Visual Studio Code and I have it already opened. I have created a new folder which will contain all of the code and data we need to run our application. We will need multiple files: index.html, styles CSS, script.js and quotes.json. So let's create them now. Let's first start with the HTML. I can generate boilerplate code for my index.html in Visual Studio Code easily by typing HTML:5 and pressing enter. This generates the minimal viable HTML code that is valid. Now I need to include external dependencies like fonts from Google Fonts. I have decided to use a font called Roboto because I believe it fits nicely with our intent. I also need to change the title. Now I need to link an external style sheet document where all the styling will take place. We already created it and it's called styles.css. Let's close the side panel so we have more place for our code. That's all for the head section of the HTML. Now let's put some content into the body. We will need to show the progress of the training, like how many mistakes the trainee made, what is the current progress, and also how much time it took so far. We can identify this division as a status bar. It will contain 3 additional divs, each for separate metric. It would be nice to see the changes that we are doing in real time, so let's run our GoLive server. Next part will be a container that will hold the text for the training itself. Let's simply call it container. The last part of HTML will be a modal window which shows the overall results for given training text once finished. It should contain a header with a nice clear message. Also, the text with all the information about metrics that were measured, and lastly, a call to action button which restarts the application. Besides this HTML code, we need to place a script tag that references the external dependency, the file with our JavaScript code. We put it before the closing body tag. That's HTML out of our way. Let's handle CSS styling next. As usual, we need to start from the top, so let's style the body tag. We do not want any overflows, so we set it to hidden and width and height to 100%. To make sure there is no scroll bar, we set margins and paddings to 0 and border to none. Everything should be placed in the middle of the page, so we will go with flex display and align items and justify content with the value center. The background can be a little more gray because absolute white looks weird to me. The font family will be Roboto Mono. Okay, some changes are happening already after I saved the changes to my styles.css. Let's now style our status bar. We identify it by its ID, which is status -bar, because there should only be one in the whole app. The position should be fixed specifically to the top of the viewport. Since it will take the whole width of the viewport, the left position should be equal to 0, just like top. The height will be a fixed number equal to 100 pixels, and it should be just the right amount of space. Besides that, let's give it some padding of 12 pixels and set size relatively to the size of viewport height as 2vh, which is equal to 2% of total viewport height. Lastly, let's set the color of text to an off-black color using shorthand value #222 and give the status bar flex display. In this case, we spread the content horizontally using justify content space around. The direction the elements should flow is row. Now, when the status bar looks presentable, let's focus on the modal window with results. The modal window with the results should ignore the flex display configuration of the body element. It can be achieved with position set to fixed, just like with the status bar. On top of that, let's give it a fixed width of 400 pixels. We need to differentiate it from the background, so we set the color of the modal window to bright white and also put a border that further separates it from the background content. We round the border a little so it looks more smooth. Also padding makes it a little bit easier on the eyes. We want the 400 pixels to be the final width, so we set box sizing to value border box, which guarantees that. Display flex and its usual followers, justify content and align items with value center, put everything nicely in the middle of the modal window. Direction of the element flowing is now column, so they are organized one above the other. Text align ensures that text is nicely centered. Everything looks good with the exception of our call to action button. It's not styled and it does not even allow clicking. We need to do something about that. First of all, we might have more similar buttons, so let's target it by the class called button. Some padding to make it a little bigger always helps. We set the color of the button text to white and change the font size to a larger one with a value of 18 pixels. Color of the button can be slightly lighter black with value #333. Let's also define the border, because we will animate the background, so we want our button to be defined exactly by the borders. Also, let's put margins, so there is some white space around the button itself. By setting the cursor to a pointer, we show the little hand when hovering over the button. The user select property makes sure the text of the button is not selectable. Lastly, let's give it a transition with quarter-second duration on all changes, which will allow for a smooth hover animation. The hover properties of button follow the button properties. We set the lighter background and darker text color with little bolder text. The transition will take care of the rest. Okay, so far so good. Everything looks great. So now it is time to style the text that will be used for training. For that to happen, we first need to hide the modal window, which is in the way. That is quite simple. Let's give it a display set to none until the logic in the JavaScript code decides something else. Now, when the model is invisible, we need to put some text into the container. In order to do that, we need some text to work with. I have downloaded some quotes from GitHub in the form of a JSON file and copied it into my file called quotes.json. I will move it to the file now. We will pick some random quote from there and manually enter it into the container, so we can see how the styling will work. The styling of the container should be pretty simple, so let's get it done. Again, there is just one container in our app and it will have the ID container. We set its width to 50% of the viewport because we want to have some white space around. The display mode will be flex with everything centered in the middle. The font size will be exactly as the one in the top bar, equal to 2% of total height of viewport, so 2VH. I have decided on the little lighter black with value #222. Again, just in case, let's center everything in the center using text align and set the line height to 1.5 of font size. Also, let's make a little bit more space horizontally between the letters so it is easier to track their status. If we have a better look at the finished application, we would see that each letter is a separate span element containing one character and possibly a class, depending whether it is a character which is currently being typed or it was correctly or incorrectly typed before. Let's save and see what we see. Perfecto, let's now format it a bit. The class current will be given to the next character that needs to be typed. It will have white color and very complex text shadow, which honestly, just copy-paste it from me, unless you want to use your own. In the similar manner, let's create classes correct and wrong respectively and give it red or green color based on the result. Now, when we save the changes, we will see that, well, nothing changed. And that is because we did not really give any span in the container any of the classes. So let's do exactly that right now. After we gave some of the span elements classes, it now looks almost like a working app. But the metrics are not updated, time is not running, and there is no interaction really. So we need to start writing the JavaScript code and enable the interactivity. Let's get to it. First of all, let's delete the contents of the container so we can generate them dynamically. Much better. Now, let's open the file script.js and start writing our business logic. When we look at our HTML code, many elements have IDs so that we can reference them and then populate certain elements with values we calculate dynamically. Let's create variables that reference all these elements. Somewhere down the road, we will need all these references. We need to reference the container itself, so we can populate it with our quote texts. We need elements in status bar to update the number of mistakes made, the progress, and elapsed time. In the same manner, we need to target the model window with the results, so we can share the final values of different metrics there. Another thing to do is to create all the variables that will hold dynamically generated text. Firstly, an array that will hold all the texts from the JSON file. Let's call it text to train and define it as an empty array. Following this, we need an asynchronous function that will read the contents of the file. But first, let's see the JSON file itself and let's describe its structure. The file itself is one JSON object that contains a single property called quotes. This property contains an array of objects, where each object is a quote with two properties: quote and author. We do not really care about the author. We create an asynchronous function called fetchTexts that will load all the quotes from the JSON file and put it into our array texts to train. I'm using an arrow function to declare the function and the word async to signify that it is an asynchronously running function. The reference to this function is passed to a constant with name fetchTexts. The function itself uses fetch in tandem with await to get the contents of the file into variable response. Then again, using await, it is converted into a JSON object that can be further parsed using array method map to get only the quote part of the quotes object. Finally, I store the extracted contents into the array variable for using later. Next, we need to declare all the variables that will hold dynamically changing values. Variable random text will hold on quote at a time, paragraph will reference to newly created paragraph with text, spans will reference all the spans inside paragraph, mistakes will hold number of incorrectly typed characters, position will point towards the current position within text, progress will be a string containing position and total length of the used quote text. Now is there for the current time, and elapsed time is a reference to the setInterval function that will be updated every second and will set time in the status bar. The following step is to create a function that will initialize the whole application. It should randomly pick one of the quotes for training, then generate the contents of the paragraph as individual span elements, each holding exactly one character, and inject them into HTML content of the container element. If there was any previous content in the container element, this should be removed before populating it with the new one. All the variables tracking progress should be reset to its initial values, and user interface, specifically the status bar, should be reset as well with these values. As we said before, we pick random quote to be the training text. Then we create a new paragraph element. We loop over the characters in a randomly picked quote and create span elements that are subsequently added to the paragraph element as its children. After that, we make sure that the container element is empty by removing the first child element as long as there is some available. Once this is done, we populate the container with our newly generated content. The variable spans is set to reference these newly appended spans so we can use it later. Position variable is set to its initial value, which is 0. We add the class current to the first character so the user knows which character needs to be pressed on the keyboard next. All the other metric tracking variables, like mistakes and progress, are set, and also their representation on status bar is reset to initial values. Lastly, the setInterval function is started. This function will check the time every second and will update the status bar's elapsed time accordingly. Once we have this piece of code done, we need to actually call it at the initial load of the page. As we can see, nothing happened because I made a simple, silly mistake. When I was referencing the JavaScript file, I used the incorrect name. This should be called script.js. And once I reload it and save it, it is now working as expected. Since both functions, fetchTexts and initScript, are asynchronous, we cannot call them in a global scope using await. Therefore, we create a self-invoking async function, which contains calls to both our functions with the await keyword. This will make sure that these activities happen only once when the page is loaded. Cool! After saving the changes, we can see a randomly chosen quote set in the middle of the screen, and the first character is highlighted using CSS class current. However, there is still no interactivity. Even if you press the keyboard, nothing happens. That's because we need to create an event listener for action key press and handle the pressed key there. So let's do that now. Firstly, we create a condition to ignore any keys pressed once the whole text has been finished. We can do that simply by checking position, and if it's greater or equal to the length of the text, we are done with the text and can just return from the event listener. Secondly, we need to check the current character with the value of the key that was pressed. We can encounter two situations. Either character is empty space or not. If the character is an empty space, the situation is a little bit special. In order to make the empty space visible when it is the current character, the app adds the character underscore to the span. So we need to check whether span contains character underscore, while at the same time the variable randomly chosen text contains empty space at the given position. And lastly, we need to check if the key pressed was indeed for empty space. In case the character is something else, we simply check the key pressed and value in the span element. If the conditions are met, we add class correct, and if not, we add class wrong, and in either case we remove class current from the given span. After that, we need to increment the variable position which holds the current position. In the second half of the code, we check if the end of the training text was reached. If so, we reset the elapsed time interval and update the modal window content with the resulting values and then return from the event listener code. If the end has not yet been reached, we add the class current to the next character in line. If this character is empty space, we also set the text of the span to the character underscore. We then update the variable for progress and its interface representation in a status bar. Once you save your code and reach the end of the training text, you will see that the modal window appears with the metrics populated. But the button for restart does not work. So the last thing we need to do is to create an event listener for this as well. Since we have a variable that references the button, we can use that. This last missing event listener waits for click action on a specific element, the try again button, and when clicked, it hides the modal window and executes the init script. Now the typing trainer is finally complete. After finishing training, the modal window appears, showing the results of our typing attempt. Once you click on a button Try Again, the new training will commence. Thank you so much for joining me on this tutorial journey to create a simple but effective typing trainer. I hope you found the content interesting and that it helps you in your coding endeavors. If you have any questions or suggestions, feel free to leave them in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to stay updated on future tutorials. Happy coding, and until next time, goodbye and keep typing away.